U.S. History 2323, Lecture 8, Overview on U.S. Imperialism. When you look at U.S. imperialism, you have to realize that there were already interactions between the United States and the rest of the world that date way back before George Washington. For instance, we were trading with China before we were ever, before we were even a nation. We signed our first trade treaty with an Asian power in 1833 with Siam, which would be modern-day Thailand. Naval officer Matthew C. Perry opened up Japan to American trade by force. It's called gunboat diplomacy in the 1850s. Hawaii, which Americans had been interested in since the late 1700s, were able to finally overthrow, at least the ones that were in favor of establishing American rule there, the royal family, Queen Liliuokalani, or Queen Lil as I call her for short, will be the last of the royal family. Now again, something in the news that you'll see occasionally is that the royal family rights in Hawaii are being restored somewhat, so that's still in play. Cuba had been an American interest member in the Austin Manifesto. However, it was mainly just a country to visit until we get to the Spanish-American War, which is coming up here in the notes. Danish West Indies become the U.S. Virgin Islands in 1917. We purchased them. Alaska we buy from Russia in 1867 for 7.2 million. Midway Islands, I think it's the same year as Alaska. We seized those in the middle of the Pacific because remember back here you needed to have coaling stations for your Navy to put coal in the ship so you could power your way across the ocean to the next port. And then the Germans and the British and the Americans divide up Samoa, and the U.S. got the best harbor, Pago Pago, and that's still part of America. Samoa is still the people of Samoa, the people of Guam. We'll get to others. They're U.S. citizens who vote for the president, but they don't have a representative. They're more of a U.S. territory. They don't have representatives in Congress. However, you're going to start seeing a change to all-out imperialism. This is I call imperial impulses at the turn of the century, or by the turn of the century, as we get into the 20th century. Leave the 1800s. Now, the Monroe Doctrine had already created, and we didn't have the power to enforce it, but had created this idea that the Western Hemisphere was off limits to new, not existing, but new colonies. The French tried to challenge that during the war with Mexico, during our Civil War, and they had a in military conflict with Mexico over it. And this is where the Cinco de Mayo, because that's going to be when Porfirio Diaz defeats a French force in 1862 on the 5th of May. There was also an addition to the Monroe Doctrine that will be in honor of Teddy Roosevelt, which was called the Roosevelt Corollary, which basically doesn't just say no new colonies. It says if there's ever a problem in the Latin America, Caribbean area, the U.S. reserves the right to go in and resolve that problem before the Europeans use it as an excuse to seize that country and make it a colony again. The Manifest Destiny theme of controlling the continental United States, the 48 contiguous states, what will become the 48 contiguous states in the 1840s. That it was part of God's plan to have the U.S. go from ocean to ocean. The Frederick Jackson Turner thesis, Closing the American Frontier, which is all this is going to be in your notes. The idea that great countries expand. Albert Beveridge, I think he's from Indiana, senator, he believed that America's depressions, our downturns, were due that we didn't have enough places to sell American goods, so he was encouraging imperialism for that reason. We'd have places to dump American goods overseas. Then you get the survival of the fittest. Remember, that was going to be a theme, a little bit of that pseudo science that we talked about with the immigration, where strong dominates the weak. Well, this will be in the world of nations, the strong nations dominate the weak nations. Missionaries are extremely active during this time, taking the gospel to Asia and Africa. Alfred Thayer Mahan, he believed in, and I think I gave you the book title, that great nations have great navies, and so he'll encourage TR to use the Great White Fleet. You'll see references to it later again in your text. And then remember, Europe is already carved up China and Africa, and so if we don't get into the race, we will be left behind. So that's going to be the impulses that help push us into that. Remember, we were colonies, now we're going to create colonies. Two models, one's the Spanish-American War on the left, the other's the Panama Canal. Now you can go through these in the notes and get the vast majority of it, but basically it just tells you that we will go to war to liberate quote-unquote Cuba, and then eventually we decide that we want to hold on to it. But in the Treaty of Paris, we will get with Spain, by defeating Spain in the Spanish-American War, we will get Cuba and Puerto Rico and the Philippines and Guam. Those four areas. That's going to all be in your notes already. Then in Panama, initially there was this plan way back in 1850 called the Clayton-Bulwer Treaty, which the U.S. and Britain were going to build a canal together once there was a way to do it. Okay, that changed or was rewritten in 1901. Hay being John Hay, the American. Clayton was the American in the 1850 case, and Ponsfoot would be the Brit. That now rather than having it built together, it's whoever builds it, and the U.S. wanted to build it, it would be shared for everybody. So the French tried to build a canal. Remember, this is Ferdinand de Lesseps. He had built the Suez Canal. This is going to be an attempt in Panama, which ends without success. Okay, there was talk about building a canal through Nicaragua rather than Panama, which is part of Colombia at this point. And then Thomas Horan will negotiate or take a proposal from the U.S. to the Colombian Senate asking for a strip of land through Panama. That plan is rejected by the Colombian Senate, and so you have basically Teddy Roosevelt will encourage a revolution in which Felipe Buena Varela will win, break away from Colombia, create the country of Panama, and within a week or so we have a treaty to build a canal through there. The canal will take 11 years to finish, 1903 to 1914. That's 11. And there's the engineers, and then Gorgas is the medical, because there's lots of to keep workers alive and squash yellow fever, all those kinds of things. That's going to be a factor. Consequences of us having a empire again. The insular cases, does the Constitution follow the flag? And the U.S. Supreme Court says no, it doesn't. So we had to make deals with all these different countries. So Hawaiians eventually become U.S. citizens, Alaskans, Puerto Ricans. There'll be different treaties and so on. Same with Guam and Samoa. We get into a fight in the Philippines against Emilio Aguinaldo, who we had fought with against the Spanish. And then Cuba, which we initially had said we were going to let the Cubans have it for independence, and we decided we'd keep it for a while, and we did until the 1930s with what was called the Platt Amendment. In China, there's open door notes, John Hay's plan to keep China open for trade. China begins to go downhill, though, with the Boxer Rebellion. Eventually, a revolution will end the Qing dynasty, the last dynasty in Chinese history. Panama, you'll see when we get to Jimmy Carter at the end of the course, will be given the canal back, which really belongs to Colombia, but given back to Panama, and that's a process that took about 20 years. We turned it over. That treaty signed in 78. It will go into effect at the end of 1999, and so the Panamanians run that canal, but we still reserve the right to go in or to protect it if need be. This concludes Lecture 8 overview.